Hi, respected members. This is Dr. Sadasivam once again with you. Anurag, thanks for sending that wonderful video. It was a very informative video, and you had asked me to go through that video and give you my perspectives on that. Very well done video, but I have certain basic disagreements which I will come out in the later part of this presentation. In effect, what this guy talks about is initially he talks about inflation, talks about how the price of lumber has increased. Of course, not just lumber, prices of many commodities have increased in the past months, and he takes the specific example of increase in the price of lumber. That's a very hot topic. A lot of people in US talk about it, right? And secondly, he talks about various actions that the US government has taken in terms of controlling the inflation, not just in the US, but throughout the world. Governments of various countries use various instruments under their control, credit control instruments, in order to contain inflation, to check inflation. Now, when you talk about inflation, he talks about two different kinds of inflation. He talks about consumer price inflation, and he also talks about the asset inflation, which is very important. And in that, he surmises that while the CPI is affecting the people in the lower pyramid in terms of rise in price of coffee or basic things like bread, anda, etc., needed for livelihood, he also talks about inflation in the asset class, and he also talks about the fact that inflation is not equitable because it affects different members of the society in different ways, because it is affecting the poor people in some ways and it is affecting the rich people in different ways. So his hypothesis seems to be that poor people are getting poorer and rich people are getting richer. And this is not a new hypothesis. This has been on since ages. And he also surmises that the government takes money from the poor people and gives it to the rich, okay, by making policies or making policies in a manner that the money always flows from the poor people to the rich people. And he substantiates that with various indexes like Gini index, etc., etc. Not that Gini, that's a Delhi FM girl. I thought he'll come with another Lawrence curve, another concept which is always talked about whenever you talk about equality of wealth, but he just stopped with Gini's index. So certain disagreements, and I totally disagree with him with his contention that the government takes money from the poor people in order to give benefits to the rich people, as a result of which the gap between the rich and poor people is on the increase continuously. This is as far as that particular video is concerned, on which you sought some of my opinions. We are all aware of the fact that there are many accomplished people in this particular WhatsApp group, all from IITs and IIMs, including you. You are an MBA from Jamnalal Bajaj, Anurag, and you understand econometrics very deeply. But to the best of little knowledge I have, I will come out with certain points. I know this is a long video, and you will hear this video. I'm sure you have your own viewpoints, right? I'll wait for those viewpoints also. Now let's go back to the World War II when it ended in the year 1945. A group of countries joined together. They all understood the evil effects of the war, how it affects everyone in different ways. I mean those countries. And they decided that the whole world will function under one currency, pegged with one currency. Because of US preeminent possession at that point of time, they decided that there will be one standard currency, which is a dollar. And I think it happened in a place called as Bretton Woods, and it's one of the most important history in the subject of economics, where it was decided that the dollar will be pegged at somewhere around 34 or 35 dollars per ounce of gold, I think. because every single currency which comes, it will be backed by equal amount of gold. So instead of getting into this headache of transporting gold from countries to countries, logistics, pirates looting the ship, sometimes Suez Canal, and because of all these, they decided this, and of course they set up a system where a balance sheet ledger will be set up, credit entries, debit entries, and of course all currencies will be pegged to the dollar. That was Bretton Woods the agreement somewhere in the Second World War. Then we will come back to the next story based on the fact based on which all the monetary policies of various countries was decided. This was the production era, production age, because the focus was on production, where 100% focus was given on goods. Talking about machineries, you can call it as some kind of a second industrial revolution after Renaissance in Italy many centuries back. If you look at the basic economics, there's one law called the Say's law of economics. I'm sure most of you studied economics, you know that. It says supply will create its own demand. A simple example of that is our own Maruti Udyog, because when Maruti came into picture in the year 1984, there were only two companies, Hindustan and Fiat company, Premier Padmini, right, Mumbai based. Whatever demand was there at that point of time was met by these two companies. It's not that there was a huge demand of cars and people were suffering because they didn't have cars, etc., etc. They were making some few 25,000 cars per year, each of these two companies, and whatever they produced got sold, and there was not any excessive demand at that point of time. But when Maruti came into picture and when Maruti started manufacturing cars, I'm talking about 84, where did the demand come from? This is what is Say's law of demand. If you increase the supply of any good, the same will automatically take place. Demand will be generated because any kind of a supply will create its own demand. Another example that I give in all my training programs is that in a specific place, let's assume there are no tea vendors. Life goes on. People don't take once in a day, they get tea at 1 o'clock in the morning, and 3 o'clock they get another tea in the morning, and life goes on. But if a tea vendor comes outside and he puts up a good stall, some adarak chai or some tasty chai he gives, another vendor puts off a chole bhature ki dukan, for example, automatically you will find that demand starts getting generated, and both in the tea shop as well as in the chole bhatura shop, you will find people flocking there. It doesn't mean earlier demand was unfulfilled, but new supply of goods in the form of adarak chai and chole bhatura will create its own demand in that place. And the same thing applies not just for cars, for every single product in the whole world. Once the product comes, the supply comes, when people start seeing value in it, the demand gets generated. And Mayank Parikh ji and other sales people know that demand generation used to be one of the focus areas of Maruti. Even during the years, Bhargav Saab used to talk about it, Khattar Saab used to talk about it, your Arun Malhotra Sahab, Arvind Saxena Sahab, Ravi Bhatia Sahab, all of them used to talk about demand generation. You know, that was one part of it. Rohtas Mahal Sahab used to talk about it. Keep on increasing your product. But then when the capacities were increased, we landed up at excess capacities in the sense that your supply outweighed demand. So that was, then came the marketing age somewhere in the 70s. I'm talking about the international markets. I'm not talking about the Indian market. Supplies were too much. That was when you had excess supplies and demand wasn't there. So that was the age of marketing, right? We're talking about the marketing age, not just Maruti, because Maruti is much later. Then comes the age of consumerism. What is consumerism? Consumerism typically talks about people borrowing money to spend on goods and services. So what does the government do? The government keeps on decreasing the interest rates. So the more and more the government keeps decreasing the interest rates, the money becomes that more cheaper, and people start borrowing more and more, and they start spending more and more. Age of consumerism. So many things happen when people start spending more and more. what happens? The demand for goods and services increase, and when the demand increases, there will be capacity expansions, and when there are expansion, there are more employment. So more employment means more salaries, more money in the hands of people, and more money in the hands of people means more spending, and this leads to kind of a virtuous cycle in the economics, one leading to another good thing. This is a business cycle, you know. But good times do not last long. That is why we have this concept of business cycle, because every business cycle has a time period of 60 years or 70 years as per traditional macroeconomics. Every cycle goes through expansionary, then there is a peak phase, then there is a contraction phase, and there is a trough phase. Something like your product's life cycle. You have an alternating electricity cycle, sine wave cycle, right? So these are, the phases. Now coming back to this particular point that he had raised, the points about the government borrowing more and more, reducing the interest rates, pumping up the consumption, as a result of which the inflation happens. And he clearly says that inflation is affecting the poor people much more than it's affecting the rich people. Okay, we will discuss about that. Now the government gets into debt by getting more and more. It's not just in the United States. We are seeing that happening in India also. We had recently released an RBI report where the government will be coming up with sale of treasury bonds, GSAP, GSEC, etc. Kind of a typical monetization process. We talked about various stances: accommodative, hawkish stance, dovish stance, neutral stance. Today, at this point of time, the RBI has recommended by the Monetary Policy Committee, we will be following this accommodative stance, because that's a kind of fiscal expansionary policy where liquidity will be injected into the system, and obviously when you inject liquidity into the system, that leads to inflation. Is inflation good? Not good. But just as inflation is not good, deflation is also not good, because when deflation happens, the industry suffers, there will be loss of job, and then it gets into a vicious circle, something opposed to the virtuous cycle which we talked about some time back. Now, what happens typically during the sale of treasury bonds is it puts money in the hands of people. So when it puts money in the hands of people, so what do people do with that money? They go out and spend it. When they spend, there is demand, and when there is demand, the prices of things go up. So typically when you talk about inflation, you need to keep in mind three important things. One is a cost push inflation, and then the second variety, which is a demand pull inflation, and the third one is because of the government printing notes, right? It's not, it is infusion of liquidity, otherwise people get confused. So all these things lead to, inflation. So when you talk about inflation, there are two inflations. One is CPI inflation, which is the consumer price inflation, which affects every common person in terms of your milk, bread, vegetable, onion mami, ninad. The second is asset price inflation, which is about increase in price of your real estate, etc. So in effect, inflation as a concept is not equitable. So typically when you talk about equitability of inflation, it talks about how it affects the rich people and the poor people in different ways. So a lot of economists think that poor people are getting poorer and the rich people are getting richer, and for that they often use this Gini index. We talked about that index a little later. So when it is affecting the poor people in terms of their basic livelihoods, in terms of your bread, butter, etc., etc., roti, nar, roti, kapda, as far as Indian context is concerned, the inflation is leading to increase in price of products. And when the price of products increase, it is the companies who get benefited out of it, and all those shareholders in those companies, they derive the benefit of increased prices, as a result of which rich become richer. Tata Motors increased by 300 times, from 100 to 300 rupees, right? So when you talk about the basic needs are very finite. Finite means very, very limited. In Maslow's hierarchy, there are certain basic needs which start from your basic needs, security needs, and then you have the social needs, then the esteemed needs, and then the actualization. Except for the last All the other needs are very, very finite, because any human being cannot eat more than 5 rotis, right? If you have a bean in your family, he might eat 8 rotis. More than that, one cannot. That's basic needs. But once the basic needs are met, then you go to the next level of needs, which are infinite. Because a guy uses an Alto, wants a Fortuner car, then he wants to go for a Land Rover, then wants to go for a personal aircraft, and then he wants a yacht. There's no limit, right, for desires. Because in life, the the needs are unlimited, but the means to achieve those needs are very, very limited. Something akin to Mahatma Gandhi's quote, which clearly said that God can satisfy everybody's need, but not everybody's greed. And that's exactly where these basic needs come into picture. So these stimulus packages, for example, US released a stimulus package of $1,400 to its citizens, and we see the government of India is also releasing huge amounts of money through your Manrega, etc., etc., to rural employment. So let's understand one important concept, that the people in the low income bracket, the lower end of the pyramid, they need the help of the higher income bracket people for them to spend money, because the expenditure by the high income people in terms of food, in terms of travel, leisure, etc., etc., that is what is putting money into the hands of low income people. Let's not forget that. Some people expect those 15 lakh rupees also to come into their pocket straight, right? There's a symbiotic relationship between the high income and low income people. And people who have studied macroeconomics and econometrics, you all must have studied Schumpeter's postulates, which talk about all these in great detail. But in most of these posts, they talk about inequality of wealth. Most talked about subject, inequality of wealth. So whenever you talk about inequality of wealth, you talk about some important concept, which is Gini's index, which talks about the gaps between the haves and the have-nots, which is a communist kind of a mindset. That's how I personally see that. Otherwise, he was a scholar, he was a PhD guy. So they always talk about how the gap between the rich and the poor is increasing. They will give you statistics. In this particular video that you said, he shared the fact that Gini's index going up from 0.39 to 0.65 between 67 and 2015, right? This particular video that you had spent, he clearly talks about the gap between the poor is on the increase. True, not just here. Most ladies use this to secure brownie points from people who matter. And who are those people? The people who matter for votes are the majority of the low income people. As this index itself says, that 1% of the people, they own more than 80% wealth in the whole world. So typically what matters in election, who matters? It's the majority. Then how do you appeal to these people? By constantly telling them that the gap between the rich and poor is widening. They will give you some PhD level research statistics, how that is happening. They will give you some figures to substantiate that, because that is going to give them brownie points in terms of winning the election. This is not something that's happening in US. It's happening throughout the world, wherever elections are held and wherever democracy thrives. It thrives in India also, because every single politician wants to appeal to the poor people, and they want to say, appeal to those people, saying that the government is taxing the poor and going to the rich. And we see a lot of posts who talk about Adanis and Ambanis and how they are becoming rich and how the poor people are becoming poor, etc. And they will give you various statistics like how Jeff Bezos, Gates, Elon Musk, three people, together they constitute more than 50%. These three guys, they share more than 50% wealth of US, people are saying. Yes, which is true to a large extent. Your Gini's index cannot be wrong. They're all researched PhDs research. Lawrence curve cannot be wrong. They're all researched PhD papers, and we have the highest regard for them. It is not wrong. But the issue is, what the politicians are hiding is the constitution of the top 1% people. is under constant churn, my dear friends. 30 years back, you look at who were there in that 1%, and today you look at who is there in that 1%. That is going constantly undergoing a change, because a majority of the people who are currently the so-called richest people in that 1% category, they were in the low pyramid. They were subsisting on doles 30 years back. Everybody had to work hard, but nobody will say that to inspire the poor people. They will never say that. They had put in huge stakes in the game, as a result of which they have come to the top 1%. People keep changing. But this fact will always be hidden from the poor people, because that will not fetch them votes. Recently, 2 months back, I put up a video which talks about the journey of the share market in India for the last 25 years, in which most of the companies which were constituents of the your Sensex 50, I think those days it was 30, I'm not very sure. Most of those companies are not there. If you now look at today's list, it is not there. Most companies are not there. So there is a constant churn that is happening. So this concept of poor people getting poorer, rich people getting richer, true, but people are changing. We shouldn't say poor people. Hardworking people are going and occupy. Look at maid in our house. We had a maid whose daughter was studying in an engineering college. The maid is using a cell phone. She has all the gadgets. She has a refrigerator. She has a color television. She has her brother, her son drives a motorbike. And look at the standard of living of a normal maid. But look at how they lived 20 years back to 25. Why should we worry about Ambani is earning and how much is Adani? Why should I worry about gap between rich and poor people? Why should I worry about that? I need to worry about myself. In my own case, in 84, when I passed my plus 2, I didn't even have a cycle. I used to take a rented cycle for 30 paisa for half an hour and 50 paisa for 1 hour, right? Rented cycle. I used to drive the rented cycle because my parents didn't get a cycle. Only after passing school, my dad got a cycle for me, and that too, a hero cycle. I wanted a rally cycle, but my dad said no, only hero cycle. He said you will get, because I didn't get into IIT. I could get into CIT and BIT. So he said hero cycle is enough for you, 750 rupees. So I have come from cycle to car today. I purchased a Fortuner 2021 model 2 months back. So I have to look at how much my life has changed, and I shouldn't be looking at how much is the gap between rich and poor. We have to look at it as a issue between hardworking people, right? Ambani has become richer by 200 billion, $200 billion. Why should I be bought? I had a cycle, now I am having a car, right? Politicians are stoking their emotions. Look at all those so-called poor people. Every poor people have motorbikes at home. They have televisions. They have refrigerators. Their children are studying in English schools. Many of them have second-hand cars. There is a maid who had a 800cc car. So this concept of rich getting richer, poor getting poorer, these are not political stunts to appeal to the low-income population, right? A guy can afford to buy a car. He can afford to spend 300 rupees on petrol. He can spend 500 rupees for a movie ticket. He can spend 200 on a parking ticket, 300 on coke, 400 on popcorn. But he cannot pay 2 rupees extra on 1 liter of petrol, right? He will speak for 5 hours on why government increased the price by 5 rupees, right? So there are people who will find fault in everything that the government is doing, right? So this is my first impression about that particular video, and that guy is a Lely of United States, right? He's an educated economist, there's no doubt in it. But sometimes you have to, play to the gallery of politicians. Maybe it is his livelihood, we really don't know, because you need to appeal to the low class people, not just in India, even in US, they have to appeal to the low class people, low end people, Americans, so typically the redneck Americans, right? So the low income people constitute a large majority, and it is those people whom politicians should appeal to. And I hope I have been able to give you my perspectives on that particular video. And Anurag, I must say you are stoking my intellectual curiosity very well, and thank you so much. I spent a lot of time. I made this video as a practice session because I am a trainer. It is necessary for me to train hard, work hard, because currently, as you know, business is down, my pipelines are not full. But when the business improves, I need strength in my lemur bone to run the race, and this is part of that preparations. Because an Olympian cannot sit and sleep just because the Olympic Games have been postponed, and much in the same manner, I do practice my training skills on a daily basis. And thank you so much, Anurag, for stoking my intellectual curiosity. Keep stoking and helping me practice my training sessions. Thank you so much, Anurag, and I wish all the respected members have a nice day. And this is Dr. Sadashivam signing off till we meet again in the next post. Bye bye. Jai Hind. Bharat Mata ki Jai.